I'm not allowed to say why people aren't here. Okay. So what we're going to do today, again, rearranging the syllabus a little bit. This was supposed to be the last topic that we do, but I wanted to put that in. I want to put it in now so we have the opportunity to do a lab, an exercise. And so we're actually going to look at the operator space on a couple of our tractors down there and do some measurements so we understand what some of this terminology means, what some of these measurements, what's significant, just thinking about how we design this operator space, what goes into designing that, and some of the thought process, okay? Now we could spend, this is again, like a lot of the subjects in this course, we could spend a lot of time on this particular subject, and it would take somebody with a little bit more in-depth knowledge than I have, or I'd have to figure it out to be able to lead you guys through that. But what we're going to do today is kind of an overview of some of these things that you'd have to consider. And I'll give you an idea of what you'd have to look into, what kind of things would factor into designing this operator space and so forth. And so we'll kind of leave it at that. So we're going to look at a pretty high level view of this and just that basic understanding. So if you ever get to this part at in your professional careers, these are the kind of things that you're really going to have to start learning and understanding to be able to apply. Okay, does that make sense, what we're going to do? So, not a whole lot of depth, but fairly broad, fairly high level overview of stuff here. Okay, so we'll get to it. Let's ask questions and discuss too. So I know this is Wednesday and you got your exam and you're probably not happy about the score, but set that aside. You guys are all right. You're going to be okay. And let's focus on this and let's, discuss some things. Have a little bit of fun here maybe. So these are the three things that I want to look at. Talk first of all a little bit about safety. And it's somewhat obligatory in all our classes that we do some safety stuff, but it is very obligatory in a company and very important too, especially machine design and stuff like that. And so, hitting that and talking about it a couple different times is not a bad thing. So we'll look at safety. Take a little bit of time and talk about operator exposure to environmental factors. So what things around the operator do I need to consider when I've got an operator that has to operate a machine or be in some kind of communication or touch with that machine. And then talk about that operator-machine interface, what it looks like, what has to go into designing that. Okay, so 3 topics that we'll hit pretty quick today. Set us up for next week. All right. By the way, before I go into that, I mentioned in the email, if you didn't see that email, I want to do the lab on Monday of next week instead of Wednesday, as the pattern has been. So I know Monday morning at 8 for that first group, you're like, oh, really, Monday morning at 8? But Wednesday is going to be cold and rain, and this is outside stuff. Monday is looking like high of 74 and sunny, and so it's like, I think let's do this on Monday. So if anybody that's in that, especially the first group or the last group, the middle group, that's class time, so suck it up and get here. The first group and the last group, I know that's stretching you a little bit. If there's some issues that you can't come in or something like that, talk to me and we'll make some arrangements for that, because I know that's not a regular pattern. Okay? Are we cool with that? So Monday is the lab, so come Monday, not Wednesday. We will be outside, so if it's a little chilly in the morning, make sure you have a jacket, whatever you need to be comfortable outside. So that's what we got there. All right, so let's talk about safety. Come on. Let me be able to change that. All right, so a long statement here. I don't like to put these up here, but there's some things in this that I want us to dig into. This was an article that was published in 1970. So think about 1970. I was in elementary school, so there's a little bit of perspective on that. Your parents probably were in elementary schools, because I'm probably about the same age as your parents, right? So I'll admit that right now. In terms of machinery, that old big blue Ford tractor that's outside downstairs, that's a 1970s vintage. So that's kind of the vintage of the equipment and stuff that we're thinking about. And this was really the point where we got a revolution somewhat in this idea of the operator interface. So if you look before that, and when you had a machine that an operator had to be on, it was willy-nilly what the operator had, what kind of safety implications there were, and so forth. But this was the point where we said, you know, we really need to start thinking about this, and this kind of turned the industry around. So a couple things I want to go through here that we look at that'll kind of feed into what we're doing here. First off, right up front, they talk about safety, comfort, and convenience should be considered in the design, location, and construction of the operator's space. So those three words, three things. So safety, obviously we don't want to hurt people, but comfort, so we want them to be comfort, and there's also the idea of convenience. So, and we're going to look at, you know, we have the unique resources here where we have a tractor from the 1930s vintage all the way up through one that came off the assembly line last year. And so we can kind of see this progression of equipment. So we're going to start looking at how stuff was not convenient even, let alone safe or even remotely comfortable. Okay, so we're going to kind of look at all that kind of stuff. All right, so that's what this was his first statement there. The workplace should be located on the machine so that visibility in the driving position is good without the operator required to work in an awkward, tiring position. And so you find this in a lot of old equipment that when you're on the machine, your normal operating position is awkward. It's not comfortable. And there's been a lot of things that have happened, you know, even recently in the last 10 years to even make that better. So a lot of times our implements, and we've seen that through the class, our implements are trailed behind the tractor. So at some point, you got to be able to turn around and look at what's going on behind you. So let's make the seat rotate. So we do. We have some rotation ability and some things like that to be able to move the operator in that space to make it easier for the operator to do some of those kind of things. So that came out of this, thinking about that awkward and tiring position. Levers, pedals, and instruments should be conveniently and logically located. And the workplace should fit tall and short operators. And we're going to come back to that. So, you know, what is tall and what is short? And who do I have to accommodate? I'm looking around here to see who, you know, maybe Carson's probably the shortest one in the class. I don't know. Kevin, or maybe Drew was here. I think you two guys are probably like the tallest. So, all right, whatever operator space, you both got to be able to operate that thing, okay, in a safe and somewhat logical manner. So how do we do that? What do we need to consider to make that happen, right? So that's what we need to look at. In addition, the operator should be able to change his, of course this is before gender neutrality, but change the working position easily, and the work area should be free of sharp edges and obstructions such as transmission cases. So again, you look at some old tractors, and some of you are smiling and get on old tractors. When you actually got in the operator station, one leg was on either side of the transmission, so you literally had a transmission in between your legs and you were sitting right on top of it. So there was no flexibility to move your legs, so you get cramps and stuff because you really had no ability to cross your legs to be able to move around and keep circulation moving and stuff like that. So some of those changes that have been made over the years, and again, this was the document that kind of drove that really started that revolution in 1970s to say, hey, let's do this. And of course, now there's a lot of thought that goes into that, designing that operator space and so forth. Okay? Exciting? No. I recognize that. But again, a hallmark document and a point in time where things have kind of shifted, and I want us to have that perspective. So, you know, what you see, and you know, what we have down in the lab is over 50 years of really transition and improvement and stuff like that. So it's kind of neat to be able to see that and go through that. All right, so let's talk about safety a little bit, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is something that when you work for a company, you get out, especially if you're going to some type of manufacturing company or things where they're cranking out equipment or machines, they're going to have a very specific procedure for safety. And again, the experience that I had when I went on sabbatical to CNH and spent 6 months there, and I saw what their procedure was, and this is kind of what they do. This is kind of like their procedure, and every company is going to look at it a little bit differently, but they really have safety people involved very, very early, even before there's anything in design, even before you design anything. So they're looking at a design proposal to say, hey, you know, we need a machine to do this, to do some function out there. And they're going to have their safety people look at that concept and say, okay, you can do that, but if you're going to have operators around here, here's the deal. This is the kind of environment that you're probably going to have to deal with, so you're going to need to think about that. These are potential hazards, So you're dealing with this plant, and this plant could have some carcinogens and all that kind of stuff, so how do you protect the operator from that? So even before you get into a design, they have people looking at that to try to head things off and make the design process a little bit easier, so we don't get down to the end and say, oh geez, we didn't even think about that. So they've got people involved very early on in the process. Then they're going to identify known safety requirements. Where do I find known safety requirements? Standards, yeah. So they have people, I'm going to write that down because that's important. They're going to have people, especially larger companies, that's what they do with standards. So their job is to understand standards, to read standards, to know what standards are out there, to be able to tell a designer and help you understand, okay, as you're designing this, here's the standards you're going to have to keep in the back of your mind. So this is what you're going to have to know, what you're going to have to design to. These are some of the parameters that you're going to be operating under. Okay? In smaller companies, that's on the designer. So there's a little bit more onus on the designer to say, okay, I need to be able to dig through this and know what's out there. And so you have to take some of that effort as well to understand some of this. And that's why being involved in these standards organizations and stuff like that is really important, because you know kind of what's coming down the pike. You know who to talk to. You know the general kinds of things that are out there. And it helps you know where to dig up that information. Okay? Does that make sense? So the standards, and they identify that very early in the process. Then they get into a design concept, basic schematic, basic logic of what's going on, and then the safety people are looking at it again. Okay, so here was the kind of the general environmental parameters, some of those kind of things. If this is how you're going to approach it, now here's a little bit more of what you're going to have to think about through the design process. So they dig that down a little bit further. So they're talking to these safety people all the time, all the way through it. And then you go into a hardware review where you look at the hardware. And here they really look at, you don't think about this very much, but they look a lot at failure modes. How is this machine going to fail? And how does that impact safety? I mean, we don't often think about that, especially with a terrestrial-based machine, something that's running across the ground. If it fails, it stops. You get off, you see what's wrong, you try to fix it, or get somebody to come fix it, or whatever. But okay, what kind of failures might impact the operator? So if it's a machine that's going really fast, it's like some of our high clearance sprayers that are going 20 miles an hour through the field, and the failure is a wheel comes off. What's going to happen to that machine? Now we might be looking at rolls, we might be looking at least some type of an impact in the cab that operator is going to be subject to. So, what kind of things might that do to us? So understanding those failure modes and being able to see how those failure modes actually translate into an impact on the operator is a real key skill. So again, that's what these people are good at in the larger companies. That's what they were very good at. And very frustrating too to some of the designers. So they complained about these people a lot, because they think about all this other stuff, and it's like, you'd rather have them think about it than some lawyer after the fact, right? So, catching it up front is pretty critical. So looking at failure modes and potential hazards, that's what they look at there. And they think about a lot of things that a normal designer, we get kind of our heads into the design, into the technology, into the how big it is and how strong it is and how fast it goes and all that kind of stuff, and then we really miss some of these other potential hazards. What kind of things, where could the operator get their hand into, what kind of things could come apart and impact the operator. So some of those kind of issues that they need to think through. Okay, so give you an example. So I ran across something soon after I was here, actually, where I had a combine, a big harvesting machine, ingested a large chunk of metal. So pulled into the front of the combine, went into the threshing mechanism. Now most combines are designed with the threshing mechanism. The operator sits really high, and the threshing mechanism is underneath the cab. And this thing went into that threshing mechanism, which is spinning really fast, and it destroyed it. To the to the point that the neighbors heard something and thought something blew up, and they came over to see, looking for smoke or whatever. But it literally destroyed that. There was a piece of that threshing mechanism came up into the cab, dented the floorboard on the cab. So almost came up, like between the operator's feet, almost came up into the cab where the operator was sitting. So, all right, who thought about something blowing up and coming into the operator's space? So there's something interesting to be thinking about. Okay, so that's an example where something that, catastrophic like that can happen. So that was an interesting analysis, is looking at that. I have the chunk is piece of that thing that went in is actually my doorstop in my office. If you want to see it sometime. So we figured out, we think it was some slag. There was some aluminum processing in western Kentucky, and we think it was a chunk of slag that it was about this big around, about 32 inches long, something like that. That was from that from aluminum processing. They used to just land applied waste, so they just put this big chunk of aluminum out in the field. It happened to come up in the combine, caught it, and ingested it, and away we go. So, and then insurance is coming out and buying a new combine. So, interesting things there. All right. So, anyway, potential hazards, story on the side, back to the point, and then finally tracking and verification. So, they are very interested in data after the machine is produced, after it's out, after the customers are using it. Okay, what kind of warranty claims are we having? What kind of failures are happening out there? And so they make a lot of effort to track what's happening to those machines, how those machines are responding, how, what kind of things, what kind of parts are people buying for these machines. So that'll tell you what things are breaking on them and what potential safety hazards that might cause. And so there's a lot of that goes into it. So it doesn't stop when the machine goes out the door. There's still a lot of that tracking that helps to go for the next version. So it helps to improve the next version of the machine. Okay. So again, this is one company's process. A lot of companies will have something very similar to that, but that's something that, as you know, if you do go to work for especially a larger company, there's going to be some procedures like that and people that you're going to have to involve in design along the way and be able to have these conversations. Okay? Questions or comments? A lot of boring stuff, I know, but it's important stuff and things that we'll need to be able to understand. All right. Thermal considerations. I'm looking around to see who's wearing jackets, who's sitting here in t-shirts, and what is the optimum thermal condition in a classroom? Depends on who you talk to, right? So, but this is something that, especially if it's going to be an enclosed cab of some kind, you're going to have to think about in terms of that design of that operator space, all right? So, and is it going to be different if I'm designing a machine that's going to work in northern Minnesota and a machine that's going to be working in Louisiana? Will it be different? Nod your head. Yes. All right. Do they have snow in Louisiana? No. All right. So do they have sun in Louisiana? Yeah. Do they have sun in Minnesota?
Not often.
Not often. Well, that's Seattle. See, Minnesota, I don't know, maybe. But so what is the load? And think about cabs. I mean, you've seen tractors, combines, that kind of stuff. Even if you're not around them a lot, what are those cabs made out of? Primarily, there's a metal frame, but what's the rest of it? Glass or a plastic of some kind that I can see through. Does that affect the thermal loading on a? Yeah, it does. It significantly affects the thermal loading. And so being able to have that cab be functional at different thermal loadings, different thermal comforts, and so forth. And so we have guidelines, so there's a comfort range, and there's actually, I forget where it was, there's an error in this thing, so in this chart somewhere. Basically, and we're not going to go into details on this, but there are guidelines like this out there that, okay, if you're going to design a cab, this is what most operators think is comfortable. And I also have to think about, how is this machine being used? So if I think about, for instance, a combine that's a harvesting machine, the operator is going to get into that combine and probably operate that combine for several hours. They may be in that cab and not get out of that cab for several hours. Okay, so what are they going to do? If it's a cold day, they have a jacket on. you're probably going to take that jacket off. You're going to want to be comfortable and be able to move in the cab. So that's going to change your thermal environment. Compare that to like a chore tractor that I would be using around the farm just to feed cows and move stuff here and there. You know, what am I going to do? I'm going to get in that cab, do what I need to do for a minute or two, get out of the cab. Get in the cab, get out of the cab. Am I going to take my jacket off? No. Does that affect my thermal environment? Absolutely. It affects when I have a thermal environment. So if I got the jacket on, I'm not going to crank the heat up. All right? But I might crank that AC up if it's in the summertime. So, you know, how do I compensate for that? So what kind of capacity do I need to have in there in terms of the HVAC and all that kind of stuff to be able to achieve these comfort zones, to be able to get in that comfort zone. So not only temperature, but also relative humidity. So thinking about all those things, okay? So that's a big part of what we have to do and what we have to think about. Okay? And that's all we're going to say. So you got to look at it, you got to think about it. But, you know, thermal loading, all that stuff that you learned from what, 427 or what class? Looked at some of that kind of stuff, the psycho charts. You did that somewhere, right? Shaking your head. Really? All right. About noise levels, is that important? Yeah, that's really important, right? So, none of you are old enough to know who that is in that picture. Does anybody even recognize that? Any music buffs? Old music buffs? So that's a stage, and those are all speakers behind the band. Anybody ever hear the Grateful Dead? Oh yeah, the Deadheads and all that kind of stuff. I mean, these band members literally stood in front of those speakers. So imagine what that did to their hearing. All those old rock guys, they don't hear anything. So just crank it up and let it go, all right? So, but what is the, you know, sound, you know, dB levels, and we have dB meters that we can measure sound levels, you know, and here's one I'll send around, you can play with it or whatever. So, you know, that's measuring sound pressure level. So what is sound? When I hear it, what is it? Physically, what is it? It's a vibration, right, which causes what? So something vibrates, in that case it's some speakers vibrating. It could be my engine vibrating, it could be whatever vibrating on the machine. But how does it get into my ears? Pressure. It's a pressure wave, sure. It's an air pressure wave. So how does that pressure wave propagate through air? Does it matter in terms of temperature and humidity and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, it does. All right. So we have requirements and limits. But also it's dependent on the frequency of that noise. Okay? The frequency of that sound. So think about the Deadheads, you know, and the music they're going to have, screaming, you know, rock and roll, old stuff, man, it was loud, a lot of guitars and everything. That's going to be a little different frequency than I'm going to have from a machine. So are they low frequencies or are they high frequencies? And how do those all factor into that pressure level? So there's a lot of analysis that goes into that. So it's not just a matter of grab a meter, throw it out there and see how loud it is. It's a matter of, okay, how's that meter set? What frequencies is that meter looking at? You know, what are the decibel levels and so forth? Phase interference. Okay, so I'll go in a little bit of detail. This is kind of a weekend, I'm a weekend sound guy. I do a lot of audio things on weekends and stuff like that. But so I kind of get into this. But think about those band members and the Deadheads standing in front of those speakers. What happens when you take a microphone and put it in front of a speaker? Feedback. It squeals, right? So the sound comes out of the speaker, goes into the microphone, gets amplified to the system, comes out of the speaker, goes straight into the microphone, gets amplified, and you get a squeal, a really loud, really obnoxious. How in the heck are they doing that? They're standing in front. I mean, look at these guys. There's a microphone right in front, literally in front of that speaker. How do they get away with that? What's that? There's a lot of filters. There's a lot of filtering that's going on. But the neat thing that they do is phase interference. So every one of those stations has two microphones. So there's two microphones that are pointed back, you know, at the singer. So they're both picking up noise from those speakers that are come back there. But when that singer gets up to the microphone, they stand in front of one of the microphones and not the other. So now what has happened is, top microphone is picking up stuff from the speakers and my voice. Bottom microphone is not really picking up my voice because I'm not speaking into it. So what I do is take the signals from those two microphones and I flip the phase. So think about those waves are like sine waves or combinations of sine waves. I flip the phase or the polarity. It's really not phase, it's really polarity. So I flip the polarity and they cancel out. So the only thing, so all the noise from the speakers gets canceled from the other microphone, and then the only thing that I pick up between those two is what that vocalist is picking up. So that's in addition to what they do with a lot of other filters and EQ and things like that, even equalizations and everything, where I can adjust certain frequencies to make it sound better. So that goes back. Why do I tell you that? Because we can cancel noise, we can think about noise, and canceling frequencies, active headphones, active noise cancellation, that's what they're doing. So they listen to what's outside, they're feeding it to you at an inverse polarity, and that cancels out that noise, you don't perceive it, so it cancels out those pressure waves. So a lot of things like that, a lot of games we can play with on that. There's different ways to measure sound pressure level based on the frequency weighting. So if I'm designing a sound system and setting up a sound system, I'm going to use a frequency weighting that is going to be like what I hear. So people are very sensitive. We hear high frequencies a lot more sensitive. We're a lot more sensitive to high frequencies than we are to low frequencies. So if I want to balance out speakers and the sound system and stuff like that, I'm going to use a filter that is a C-weighted filter, probably maybe, that is going to be more like what I hear. Whereas when I'm thinking about damage, those low frequency waves can still damage my hearing. So if I'm looking at designing a machine or something, what kind of sound is going to damage my hearing, I'm going to actually have those low frequencies factored into that weighting. So how much weight, how much emphasis do I put on the different frequency components or the frequency content of that sound that's coming into it? So you're starting to get the feeling that there's a lot going on there. So it's not just a trivial thing that we have to measure. So there's a lot that we have to understand to be able to really measure sound and really understand what's going on. Okay. One thing I do want to talk about is, all right, how loud is too loud? So anybody that's around the church, you always got old ladies complaining, that's too loud, you're damaging people's hearing, and you got kids out there, crank it up, man, let's go. So what are you going to do, all right? So this is kind of interesting. So you look at dBs, and again, this is leaving out a lot of the details in terms of the weighting and the scales and all that kind of stuff. But looking at a decibel level, a decibel is basically a power difference. That's a ratio. Anytime you're doing a bell, is a fundamental unit, it's basically a ratio. So you're looking at basically a pressure ratio. So what's the high pressure to the low pressure? Lowest pressure that I see, highest pressure. What's the ratio between those two? That's where that measurement's coming from. And so it's a decibel. So there's a couple different things in there. So we can hear 10 to 15 dBs and so forth. You can go up through there, I won't go through all those, but like a lawnmower is an annoying sound, that's up around 90 decibels, so when you're mowing lawns, you should be hearing about 90 dBs. Woodworking, saws and stuff like that, 100. Sandblasting, I don't know, theirs are always in tubs. That one I never understood with this chart, but sandblasting is not that loud, I don't think. But you get up to jackhammers and things like that. A gunshot is 140. Okay, so stage volume on old deadheads and all those kind of stuff. Any guess of where their stage volume was? Decibel levels?
120.
So 120, yeah. They probably all have a little bit of hearing left if that was the case. So most of those stages are about 135. So where they were at 135. Okay. So I got a chart down here. So here's what OSHA does. And this is the reason I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this. Because OSHA regulations are kind of complicated in terms of what noise is acceptable and what's not acceptable. So you think about in a manufacturing facility or something like that. What can I tolerate? When do I have to wear hearing protection? Do I not have to wear hearing protection? What's the deal? So what they're actually looking at is a time-weighted average of sound, of the pressure level that you're exposed to. So they're looking at a time-weighted exposure to this. And they have a chart like this, and it gives me the duration per day in the number of hours. So this is in basically one working day or 24-hour period or whatever. How many hours are you exposed to that? This is what their allowable decibel level is. So 90 decibels. And we don't have When we were in the other room up there, we got some pretty good speakers in there, so we used to crank it up and could hear what 85, what 90 decibels and all that kind of stuff sounds like. But basically, if your 8-hour exposure level is at 85, so one below what's in this table here, if it's at 85, so above 85, you have to implement some type of a hearing conservation program, which means you've got to be monitoring people, you have to be, making hearing protection available if they want it, you need to be checking on things periodically, making sure people are okay and are not, exceeding that for some reason or getting too close to the sound sources or whatnot. So you have to do some kind of monitoring. Above that, above 90, when you get above 90, now there's a limited number of exposures. So you can be, they allow 8 hours of exposure at 90 decibels. So you can mow the lawn at 90 decibels for 8 hours a day, and they're saying that that will not damage your hearing. All right? Now, my ears hurt after an hour and a half or 2 hours on a lawnmower, so I like to wear hearing protection. Okay, that's my choice. But I think maybe my lawnmower is a little louder than that because I got muffler problems with it, but that's another issue. All right? But then it goes up from there. So 92, 95, 97, 115, 25 minutes or less at 115. So how long was a Deadhead concert? An hour and a half and 135 decibels. Yeah, those guys don't hear anything anymore. So it's all gone. Okay. But this exposure level is something that you have to think about. Okay, and it's something that you'll have to work through. So you can have some exposure to high noise levels as long as it's not a lot of exposure over a prolonged period of time. So the time factor comes into that as well. So that comes into play in terms of designing the operator space. Okay, how is the operator going to be exposed to this? How often do I have these loud noises? So, think about machines and hydraulics. We found that those fluid power systems can be really noisy and squealing and all that kind of stuff. And so we can protect the operator, but sometimes some of that noise is just really loud. Well, how often does that happen? So I'm using hydraulics maybe just at the end of a field when I have to turn around, lift the implement, turn around, set it back down. So maybe we can say, you know what, they're not going to be exposed to it for that long. Or maybe they're running a hydraulic motor that's going to be running all day long. Yeah, I need to be thinking about that now in terms of exposure and noise levels and those kind of things. Okay, does that make sense? So it's not just how loud it is, it's how long you're exposed to it. And it's also what's the frequency content of that. And how are we measuring it. Okay, so there's a lot of different pieces that go into that. Some, okay, you can see that, buy that, think about that a little bit. All right, too loud. All right, so there's that. What about vibrations? Here's a question. What's the resonant frequency of your stomach? Why do I care about resonant frequency of an internal organ in your body?
You don't want to die.
You don't want to die, right? What happens if I excite something at its resonant frequency?
Burst.
It gets bigger, it gets bigger. Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Every engineer should have seen that video. Have you seen that video with the bridge, The wind blew, got it going at a resonant frequency, and the thing destroyed, okay? So that same kind of concept, but guess what? Your liver, your kidneys, your lungs, they all have a resonant frequency. So if I've got vibrations in the cab and I hit that resonant frequency and you're like, ooh, my stomach doesn't feel good, okay? So we need to be thinking about that. So there's got to be some basic understanding of human anatomy and, where your organs are and how I don't want to vibrate those organs so that I don't make somebody uncomfortable, okay? So that's part of it. So I got to be thinking about that. So what is the human body response to vibrations? Both the psychological part, after you're vibrating for so long, it's, you does something to your brain, but there's also the physiological, like I say, they're physically moving, they're physically vibrating your different body parts. So understanding some of that human anatomy and how it responds to vibration is going to be critical to that. We didn't think about that, did we? The quiver in your liver, you heard that? Literally put a quiver in your liver. So, design of the seat and the cab and the suspension, what does that look like? So, those seats, we model that. If you look at the seat in a cab, it'll look something like this. Underneath that seat, there's some suspension under there. There's a spring and You guys even talk about dash pots anymore with, so damping and stuff like that, a spring and a damper, so, you know, what kind of suspension do I put on the seat of that vehicle to try to absorb some of that? So what's that, what kind of excitation is there gonna be on that seat? How is the operator interacting with that seat? And so, you know, a lot of our machines now, we have suspension on the seat, we also have suspension on the cab. So on some of the larger tractors, when you go to get into the cab, the whole cab will move, so the cab will actually have some suspension under. So we suspend the cab, we also suspend the seat within the cab. So all those things interact, and again, you can have resonant frequencies there. If you hit a bump and your cab moves a little bit, and that really makes the seat move, you could actually make matters worse if you don't design those things carefully. So understanding that design of how to design the seat and that environment so that the operator doesn't get bounced and wiggled and vibrated and all kind of uncomfortable things happen to it. Okay, cool. So, wow, there's a lot of this. I'm going to quit designing this stuff. Now, here's the question. We'll get back to that question of how do I get a cab that's going to work for Carson and for Kevin? So our shortest person and our tallest person, can we accommodate them? And what do we have to do? So there has to be some kind of an understanding of the anthropometric, we call this anthropometric data. So that's how big is a human body? So typically. And so you see here in the chart, we're not going to go through all these, of course, but I put this up to give you an idea of what kind of data is out there. So for every joint and every limb, every part of the body, we have some data that tells us something about how big it is. So how long is it from your elbow to your wrist? Is that critical? Yeah. So where do I put any kind of controls that the operator needs to be able to reach with their hand? That's going to be dependent on how long is their arm. You know, how far away can I put it? Where can I put this stuff? Okay. So then we have different dimensions. Of course, there's a big variety. So what do I have to accommodate? And what we often look at is a 5th percentile and a 95th percentile. So, you know, on average, this is how big. So an average length of an arm or length of a leg or whatever is this. But they could be down to really, really small. I mean, we could go crazy, or we could go way, 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 really big. So some really, really large people. So how far do I have to go to accommodate? And a lot of that is up to the manufacturer. Okay, so, and their market. What kind of market are they going to? And where does it make sense? So what you'll see a lot of manufacturers doing is looking at the 5th and the 95th percentile. So they'll look at, all right, I want to be able to accommodate basically 95% or 90% of the people, essentially. So there's going to be 5% of potential operators out there, potential people that, you know, I'm sorry, you're going to bump your head when you get in a cab. That's just all there is to it. And there's going to be 5% of the people that, you know, if you really want to operate this thing, you might have to put a cushion behind your back so you can reach the pedals. You know, it's just kind of, you know, we've got to be somewhat reasonable. We've got to find a reasonable place to start on this. Okay. So, but that's something that you have to work through with the company and say, all right, what is it that I'm trying to target? Does it matter where I market my machines? Okay, and I'll get a little bit non-PC here, if you will, a little bit. Doesn't matter if I'm sending my machine to Africa or if I'm sending my machine to China. Absolutely it matters, okay? Then there's data on that. In fact, I even looked that data up. So of people of African descent, let me try to find this so I know what it is. So people of African descent, on average, their arms are 2% larger and their legs are 4% larger than what a typical U.S. person would be, a white person or whatever, you know, on a percentile. So if I'm going to people of Oriental descent, 7% shorter arms than average, 10% shorter legs. Does it make a difference where that machine's going? Sure it does. All right, so you look at machines that are designed in China for China, you know, you get on it, you feel big, you know, so Carson would feel right at home maybe, but you know, some of us, and I'm really below average, and I feel big on some of those machines because everything is designed for a generally shorter person. Okay? So, but that's where their market is. So are there laws that say what we have to do? No, those are standards. and what we have to, thinking about what we're going to accommodate. But those are things we have to think through. That anthropometric data. Crazy stuff, right? All right, so how do we measure that? All right, so seat adjustments, again, we can go into all this, all kind of seat adjustments. What's my width, what's the height, how big does the seat need to be able to accommodate people, and, big people, small people, people with different body shapes, and, we can really go places there and solve a lot of people, so we're going to be as careful as we can as we talk about some of these kind of things. But that operator envelope, we got to think about what am I putting in that cab? What am I putting where, and what's my logic behind where I'm putting these controls? So what's factoring into that thought process? Why do I put it where? Okay? So everything's got to be somewhere. And the key thing is we have to reference this from some point. What do we call zero in a cab? So under the feet, on the seat, on the head, what is zero? So we had to determine what zero is. Okay? And this has changed over the last couple of years. So for our lab exercise, we're actually going to use an old standard and think about an old standard for what you're going to do. Just because we have some of the graphs and everything, and I'll show you in a second that'll make sense there. But basically what we do is define what's called a seat index point. A seat index point. That's what SIP stands for, is a seat index point. That's zero. So that's like X, Y, Z, that's zero on the axis. Cartesian coordinate system starts there. That's what we established. All right, where is that? Well, it turns out there is a whole standard just devoted to locating the seat index point, of how you define that in different situations and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a big question that you can do, all right? In general, let me give you in general what it means. What it used to be in the older standard, and we'll kind of stick to that as we go through this because all our graphs are kind of off of that. But the way it used to be is at the hip joint, so look sideways at the body and you think about where that hip bends. Okay, so I want to look at the rotation point of the hip, and that's why you see it up above the seat, in from the seat back a little bit. So on the side view, it's right there. So it's that rotation point. So you think about where that leg rotates, that's where it would be. And then basically in the center line of the body of the person beyond that. So it's basically from the operator, so it's where the operator sits. Okay. Now people realize that, okay, that point is depending on what kind of padding people carry around, and here's where we'll be careful what we say, how far we go on this. This point could move in, could move out, depending on body shape, body type, and all that kind of stuff. So this kind of can be a big deal. So what it has moved to, what it is now, is basically on the seat cushion. So it's instead of at the hip joint, it's moved down to underneath the hip, so where your hips would interact with the seat. So that's where that point would be. Again, still in the center line of the body. Okay, but what we'll do in the lab is kind of measure it off of there. Okay. From that, we define different things. So here's a side view of an operator. Okay, so and we have two different kinds of zones that we define. We have what's called a zone of comfort and a zone of reach. Okay? Zone of comfort and zone of reach. It should be fairly self-explanatory what that is. Zone of reach, I can get to it, but it's not necessarily comfortable, right? Zone of comfort is I can get to it and it's really easy to get to. Okay? So, what kind of controls do I want to put in one of those zones versus the other zone? The radio on my tractor, in my cab, where should it be?
Reach.
Zone of reach. Do I need to get at it all the time? No. So I can put it out of the way. I still need to be able to get to it, all right? And it's important, but it does not need to be in that zone of comfort, all right? The gear shift, where does that be?
Zone of comfort.
Zone of comfort, and we could maybe argue about that a little bit because depending on how you operate the machine, you may not be changing gears very often, so it might not be something that you have to operate all the time. But hydraulic controls may be something that you're operating all the time because I might be adjusting that continually as I'm going across the field depending on what my implement is. Okay, so there is some debate on where you put these things, but generally things that have to be accessed a lot, I've got to be able to get to. I want to put them in that zone of comfort. I want them to be there. So the side view says, okay, here's where that zone of comfort is. And we actually have dimensions on these in millimeters based off that seat index point. And again, this is what we're going to use in lab. So I want you to take these graphs, go to a cab, and find the controls that I tell you there and say, okay, do they fall within that? So look at the side view. Do they fall within this zone of comfort or not? Okay, and again, this is going to be indexed off of the hinge point on your hip. So have somebody sit in the cab, let's kind of guess about where it is, hold some tape measures up, and it's going to be some guessing, but let's see where those controls are, see if that does make sense, if they fall within that zone of comfort or zone of reach, so forth. Same way with the foot controls, and there's not a lot of difference between the zone of reach and the zone of comfort down there. So, of course, we don't have an awful lot of foot controls in the cab to begin with, so we don't need a whole lot of zone there, okay? So a lot of vehicles will have, especially older vehicles, used to have a foot lever that would release the steering wheel and tilt the steering wheel. So that's something that doesn't have to be in the zone of comfort, because I'm not adjusting that all the time, but just so I can get at it once in a while when I need to. So there's a side view, there's a top view looking down, so seat index points right here, so you're looking down from the top of that operator, where can the operator reach? Okay, the zone of comfort, out in front, zone of reach, there's zone of comfort for the foot, zone of comfort for the hands. So, you know, I don't want it too close to me, I don't want it too far away, I don't want it too far out where I have to put my arms way out. So what is comfortable? So you'll see on the newer tractors as opposed to the older tractors, almost all of those controls are on the right arm of the tractor. Everything, you can do almost everything with that one right hand. Too bad if you're left-handed, I guess. Suck it up, you gotta do it all with the right hand, so that's where we put it. So hopefully we're going to have most of those controls right in here in this zone of reach. That's where it's going to be. Top view, front view, looking at it from the front now. So again, foot, zone of comfort, how high can you lift the foot, how far up can you reach, how far down can you reach, all that kind of stuff. So that's what you're going to do. Take these charts, and they're on the, if I haven't put them up already, I'll double check, make sure I put this up there. Is it up there, Carson? You look at it. Yeah, so these slides are up there. So you got those slides, so you can pull those charts off, and we can plot these out. So we're going to measure those controls, see if they fall within these ranges. So that's what we're doing on Monday. That's our exercise. We'll look at some controls and all that kind of stuff. Okay, makes sense? Cool enough? All right. One more thing I want to look at. Cabs. All right. So there's a cab. It's actually the John Deere 7220. That tractor's out of the research farmland, and that's one you and Dr. DeWark are working with. That's that 7220, the cab on that 7220. This is the cab in another tractor that you guys haven't seen. This is a big one, 300 horse tractor, the New Holland tractor that we have out at the research farm that they're working with out there. So that's the cab, those two cabs, back and forth. Look at them. What things do you see are similar? What things are dissimilar? Actually, what do you notice that's similar between those two cabs? What things stick out to you?
Controls are on the right.
Controls are all on the right. So they're really focusing in on that zone of reach. All right. Now, this tractor, hydraulic levers are right here. They're pretty far back. So those you actually have to reach back. And so they're probably maybe stretching that zone of reach and maybe back a little bit more. Hydraulic controls on this tractor are those four little buttons up there. So you just use your little fingers and with your arm rest them on this nice soft arm rest. And away we go. Okay, so there's a difference. What else do you see? Similar between those two.
Pedals.
Pedals, yep. They look really, really similar. Clutch pedal over here, two brake pedals over there. There's that steering wheel thing I told you about in the middle, tilt the steering wheel on that one. So they're in the same location. You get in that cab without even looking down, you're going to be able to put your foot up. Those are standardized. Those locations are standardized, all right? What else do you see? See any colors that stand out?
Yeah, the U-Haul looks comfy.
Yeah, it looks comfy, right? It's a little newer. It doesn't have as much use on it. This was a couple years ago, right after we got it from, they donated this thing to us. So yeah, it was really clean. It's a little dirtier now. So, but yeah, it is more comfortable. Yep. So real small armrest over there as opposed to this nice big fuzzy, you know, not really fuzzy, but soft, comfortable armrest. That's kind of cool, yeah. Anything else color-wise that jumps out at you?
It's orange.
Oh, look at that. See that pedal? See that? See the orange on the gear shift? Go over to this one. Oh, see that pedal? See that? See that? They're orange. Might that be a standard? Maybe. All right. What do you see on that one? Now look at this one down here. Yeah, so we're going to get on this. We're going to look at that. We're going to see some of the differences what went on. So standards play a big role in this. I want to show you a couple cool standards here, just for kind of some interesting things. Again, there's a list here, 2 pages of a list of just a few standards that kind of talk about some of this stuff. But let me go out here to, let's see, we got to look at 15077. This is the one I want to look at there. So this is a standard for, showing up there it is. There we go. Tractors and self-propelled machinery for agriculture, operator controls, actuating forces, displacement, location, and method of operation. If you're going to build a cab, you want to know where to put your controls, this is what you're going to have to read. So this actually goes through everything in terms of where you're going to put it, how much force I should have to apply to be able to make it work. No more, no less. So there's actually minimums and maximums on these things for what kind of forces that you should be able to apply. So on all these levers, on the brakes, service brakes, on emergency brakes, secondary braking system, transmissions, all that kind of stuff. I'll get on to the end here. Yep, and there's locations, so they actually show similar to what we've been looking at, top view, side view, you know, where should I put all those controls. So you're going to find that they're all on newer vehicles. They're all going to be on a similar location, on the same side, basic location. It also tells us color. So what is that? There you go. What color? Red. If I see something red in the cab, what's it going to do? Probably a stop. That's what it means. Is there a reason for that? Yeah. Emergency people, emergency personnel come to an accident scene, somebody's entangled in a machine, I got to be able to shut it off. If I don't know how to shut it off, how do I get that person out of the machine? I'm endangering, you know, continuing to endanger that person. I'm also endangering my rescue personnel as well. So how do I stop it? The big red button, ARB. So if it's red, it's going to shut it off. That's basically what it is. So the keys in those cabs, a lot of those keys are red. So there's a red mark around the key, so you know this is how you shut it off. So that's what we do. Yellow, or orange. Orange is next. So what's orange? If it's orange, it has something to do with machine ground controls only. So if I get into a cab, I want to be able to make a machine move. What am I looking for? Something that's orange. Something in orange is going to have something to do with making that machine move, the locomotion of that machine. So there's the colors, all right? Yellow means anything that spins or rotates and turns on and off. What color is the PTO knob on those new tractors?
Yeah.
It's always yellow, right? So we got yellow PTO on there. So, and then black or anything else, you can make them all other colors. So the hydraulic buttons on that big New Holland, they were all different colors. So, and that's okay to do that. And the brake pedals and all that can be black, but I don't want to make them orange because that orange is reserved for something a little bit different. Okay. So that's what it is. So the colors mean something, all right? Where they are, how much force it takes to activate them, the colors, and so forth. What about all the symbols that you put on there? Let's see, which one do I want to look at now? 37, this one. So there's a whole standard just for symbols for operator controls and other displays. This is part 1. So there's a couple parts to this thing. So I go down through and there's a big long table. Look at all those symbols. Any of those make sense to you? Have you seen them other places? Your tire pressure warning light comes on in your car. Doesn't it look like that? Yeah, we've all seen that in the last couple of weeks because the temperature dropped and oh yeah, I gotta go check that air, yeah. So that thing says, come on. Those are all standardized. And so you recognize these symbols and they make sense, you know. So battery looks like a battery, plus and minus. But those are standardized. So when you're putting labels on things or you got indicator lights on the cab, this is what they should look like. There's a standard that makes sure that everybody's doing the same thing and it becomes safe and makes sense. Okay, so, and there's these things for cars too. Rabbits go fast, turtles go slow, despite what the rhyme says or what the story goes, but no, even though the turtle wins, right? All right, so there's the symbols. All right, what else we look at? The safety ones. These things are fun. You just have to look at these because these are just a little blast. Let's see. This is, which one do I want? Oh, 1164. Yeah, this is one. So people sit around and dream these things up. Okay, so safety symbols. You know, if there's going to be some hazard point, pinch point, whatever on a vehicle, I got to put some symbol there to warn the operator. So what should that thing look like? How big should it be? How should it be formatted? I'll be darned. Here we go. There's what the panel should be, message panel. That's what it should look like. There's dimensions of it. You know, we're not going to stop and all this kind of stuff. Where should they be located? What should be beside it? What should be above? What should be below? All that kind of stuff. And this is what the symbols should look like. Here's what I'm going to get to. Yeah, there's the dimensions, how big they should be, how readable they should be, all that kind of stuff. Let's conform to the standards. But then you have all these things. You know, people sit around and dream these up, and they make sense. That's the scary part, you know. So, you know, that one there, what's going to happen? Something's corroding my hand, you know. There's something acidic. I'm going to get electrocution. It's amazing how many ways there is, ways there are to become electrocuted, right? So, my kids used to have this game, Dumb Ways to Die. Did you ever get to play that thing on your phone? It just looks like Dumb Ways to Die. And that song that plays over and over and over again. Dumb Ways to Die. So there you go. Falling off of stuff, you know, don't fall off stuff. They make sense, but somebody has to think about, okay, what would make sense to people? Somebody looks at this symbol, and I know right away what the concern is, what I should be watching out for. Don't be dancing on motors, right? So that's what I want. You know, watch out for pressure coming out of pipes. So little leaks and hoses can cut you. Like a guy getting crushed over there. That was funny. Where's the good one here? So, oh yeah, sticking your hands in stuff. There's all kind of ways to stick your hands in stuff to get, I don't know what that thing is going to fall down on. You better cut it apart. Getting smashed when the back end opens, getting smashed when the back end closes. Don't be climbing in there. All right? Here we go. Oh yeah, so not only are you going to get smashed, but we're going to put a rotating blade on the bottom of it too, and a slice you as it goes. Slice and dice, getting crushed. There we go. Oh, these are cool down here. This is almost morbid. How many different ways to run over your kid with a lawnmower, all right? There are standards for this, folks. What's that?
Right leg versus left leg.
Yeah, right leg coming off, left leg coming off. Yeah, don't go on this side. If you got a wooden leg, you're okay. You know, it's already going, I guess. Whatever, but, you know, we laugh about that, we joke about that, but, you know, there's these resources to help you out for you, but thinking about what these kind of hazards are, right? So, I want to show you that. We can laugh, enjoy it a little bit. You know, they're out there, the pictures are cool, and, you know, cutting off at the knee, cutting of the leg with a trimmer. This is my favorite, though. I have this on a water bottle somewhere. You get your arm trapped in there, and you can see it getting wrapped up. That's cool. Fingers. What's that?
8.9.
Yeah, that's the one I have. Yeah, that's the whole bottle. You don't even take your leg in, man. It took the whole thing. So it wrapped you up the whole leg. Fingers getting you.
Jazz hands.
What's that?
Jazz hands.
Yeah, jazz hands. Actually, you know, that was kind of personal because my grandfather had got caught in a corn picker and with that exact kind of scenario, so it actually shredded his hands off, and he had motion of his hand about like that. So he actually, you know, that was before there was any symbols on it. Not that it made any difference. He stubborn was going to do it anyways. But you know, trying to work on a machine while it's running, it's a bad deal. There's the arm wrapped around it again. God, what the heck is he? So getting pinched between something and getting stripped off, so that's like a double whammy there. So don't get rolled around in there and cut them off. how would you get your hand through? I don't know how you do that. So, oh yeah, watch out for flying stones. Yeah. That was, I'll tell one story before I go. We'll leave it at this, but with those symbols down there, some of the safety tests that you have to do on equipment. So when I was at CNH on sabbatical, they were testing this very scenario, how rocks would fly out from a hay mowing machine. So with a rotary cutter. So a rotary cutter will, throw stones and stuff out of it. So literally what they did is when in their lab, they cleared out a bay in their shop, in the facility down there. They brought in a pile of gravel and put it in the middle of that bay. I'm kidding you not, this is getting better. All around the bay, they put paper. So they hung brown paper all around the bay, and they literally turned that machine on and drove that machine into that pile of gravel. And then when it was all said and done, they went around and looked for where the holes went through the paper in the bay. So literally that's what they did. They were making marks on the paper and seeing where they were flying and where they needed shields and all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't there the day they did it. I wish I could have been, because that would have been kind of interesting to hear, rocks flying everywhere that can drag you through a pile of gravel. So, but again, we have to understand that. We have to understand what the hazards are going to be and what's going to happen with it, what kind of symbols we need to put on it. So, I'm done. You guys can take off. Fire's the last one. Have an explosion or a fire. There's a difference between an explosion and a fire.
Hey, these are
So see you Monday. Don't forget Monday's live on Wednesday, Monday.
oh, what's a shame? Yeah. They blame it or no.
Oh yeah. Lab. Started.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I don't know if I'm being really extra, but so I just want to understand why we're looking for the optimum CV. We're just looking for like the best overlap. So, and we get the CV by calculating this. By calculating the CV with the standard deviation. And then how do we choose which is the optimal? Which one is the best?
So what I would do is just plot. So you want the middle. So your coefficient of variation, you don't
like half reset,
with
which
little
is
variation.
programs, which usually fixes virus.
Okay. Right. So what you should be able to do is plot. So if you look at if you plot your CV versus your spacing or overlap, or measure
that's from
in a couple different ways. But
But
the more it's overlap, you should see that CV. It's way out. It's
well,
going
I'm
to
at develop for
we
it,
know we
so
have a dip. So we have a big coefficient variation as it comes in. That CV
biggest
should
thing I
go
lost was
down.
time.
Okay.
Now, what should happen at some point is the CV should go back up.
Okay.
Now, it may not, it may be kind of squirrely in there the way it happens, but it may, you generally don't want to overlap it anymore. If you get to the point where those two patterns are 100% overlap, which means the edge of one pattern comes to the center of the next, so stop there. So don't take it any tighter than that. That's close enough. Okay, so we won't do any triple overlap kind of things. Doubles all we do. So you have two of them come together and then a third one right in the middle. But it's probably, most of those nozzle tips are going to be probably somewhere out a little bit further than that where it's going to be a minimum.
Yeah,
Does
so
that make
I
sense?
did between 15 and 30, and 30 looked, I was just confused also because I got the same CV, exactly the same CV for 25 and 30.
Okay, are you changing the range over which you're calculating that? Because remember, you have to go from the center of the nozzle pattern, from the center of one nozzle pattern, so it gets smaller every time, right? Are you doing that?
I think so. That's what I tried to.
Yeah, so that does look great. So you've got, so this is the sum, so you've got the 26. Oh. So this is where you're calculating the CV.
Yeah.
Right? So it should be getting smaller. So that range,
Mhm.
you should have fewer points the further out you go. And it's looking like I have the same number of points here. as I
Yeah,
have
it's the
out.
same number of points.
Yeah, so it should be a different number of points, and that's what's happening. All right,
Okay.
so let me shut this off so that I don't keep. See if I got a decent sized piece of chalk. So you have one data set here, one data set here that you're overlapping, right?
Yeah.
So that's the overlap set. My nozzle is here. Okay? So the CV, I'm going to measure from here to here.
Okay.
Okay, from those two. Now, when I overlap that a whole lot, so let me try to redraw this somewhat to the same size, but here's my nozzle tip, and let's say that I overlap them like this. Okay, and this nozzle tip is here. So now the area that I'm doing my CV on is from there to there.
Oh,
So
okay.
this becomes much shorter. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So it's from nozzle tip of this pattern to the center nozzle tip of that pattern. And as it's wider, there's more points
Okay.
to get the CV up. Okay, does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it looks to me like that's probably what you're doing.
Yeah,
You've
that's
got
probably
everything
right.
else right, but you have to change that range that you do the standard deviation over
Okay.
and everything.
And
Okay.
I think last question, where it asks for the optimum nozzle spraying distance and the boom height, we're just supposed to calculate the boom height for the spraying distance we choose to use.
It's a geometric relationship.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So if you've got a certain amount of overlap, scratching my board.
There
You've
would
got
be
a,
like an
yeah,
ideal.
you've got a certain amount of overlap there. So what you can do is look at right triangles here and stuff like that, right triangles in there. But that's geometric relationship. So the higher it goes, if I move this up, this overlap goes away. So I have to move, or it goes, if I move them up, the overlap gets more. So I need to spread them out. So that becomes a geometric relationship. So that's just looking at geometry, trigonometry, whatever, to figure out how high the boom goes, what my spacing should be. What's the relationship between boom height and spacing?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's what that is. Does that make sense? So if you have trouble getting that
Yeah, I
laid
think,
out, I have to go back and, you haven't done that
I
one
think
for a
I
while.
got that.
Yeah.
This was the, if I can find it, oh no, I changed that. It was a linear relationship when I did the different boom heights versus, okay.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, it should be a linear relationship. Yeah.
Cool.
That's it. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
thank you.
You understand it?
Yes.
Awesome. Good deal. Uh-oh. Did I make a mistake?
No, how are we supposed to know to mention speed variation? Like, it's just common sense that a U joint doesn't work at 90 degrees.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. So universal joints can't make sharp angles. They can actually. They don't work really well. Yeah, they're going to make a racket and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so there's different. There are some constant velocity joints that will work at 90 degrees.
Yeah, see, that's what I was,
Yeah, so there's a guy's name on it and all that kind of stuff. So.
cause I just bought a PTO shaft, and like, some of the options were the constant velocity ones. I was like, I knew.
Yeah, they're pricey too. And they have like a ball in there. Did I show you those on the video? I don't think I did. Yeah, so,
Well, I don't know.
yeah, so. Yeah, no, that's what I was looking for. That was the key thing there. That with universal joint, they work good, like when a tractor to implement connection. I go around the corner and keep the thing working and then straighten it back out. So it's going to rattle and bang while I go around the corner, but most of the time I'm going to be straight. So I'm not going to be operating like that.
But do they actually work at 90 degrees? Like,
They will, no,
they won't, right?
yeah, they'll bind up. Yeah, they'll bind up at 90 degrees. If you get them started, no, actually they won't. They will bind up. Yeah, it just flat out wouldn't work on there. So yeah, no, it wouldn't work at 90 degrees. But that was the discussion. So you're in good shape.
Yeah, I just figured like.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. Oh, come on.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I answered the question, I just didn't know what you wanted.
Yeah, it's sometimes, and you know, grading sometimes is difficult because you weigh that, all right, do they really understand the material, or are they really communicating it well, and all that kind of stuff, you know? So it was that, and the specific piece I was looking for as I went through that particular problem was the fact that there's that speed variation. It speeds up and slows down, but the joint angle is not zero, and there's a little bit of a joint angle there. One side is going to speed up and slow down, so it's just going to make it rattle and vibrate, and that's just kind of the thing. So that was the piece that I wanted to be able to see, because that's what I emphasized.